a huge thank you to you for joining us today in what I know is an incredibly busy week. I think I'd speak for all parliamentarians on this call today and across our network when I say that we're united in a feeling that from the agony of our loss this year must come change. I know that the experiences of the people that I serve, that I've worked with this year, will stay with me for life. The young mum who gave birth before dying of COVID, never having had the chance to hold her little baby, or the children who said goodbye to their parents on WhatsApp, never having the chance to be there in their last hours. I think most of us from this experience feel that we have to now move heaven and earth to make sure that this pandemic of disease doesn't now trigger a pandemic of poverty. 1 million of our neighbours have died, but over 100 million are now at risk of falling into absolute poverty. We know that earthquakes have got aftershocks, and that's why we have to unite together to ameliorate the consequences that you, amongst others, have been so eloquent in setting out. Now, we're very grateful to both of you, Kristalina and David, for what were really excellent curtain raiser speeches last week. We have tried our best here in the network to do a little curtain raiser of our own, which we published today. And the point that we make in our book, Just Transitions, today really is that as we think about recovery, we've obviously got to think about how we navigate what we've called the three rises: the rise in temperature, the rise in new technology, and the rise in trade conflict too. We think that a new social contract could be part of the answer, not just the sort of Bill of Rights that might get us to the Sustainable Development Goals, but new thinking on how we mobilize the resources to turn that theory into reality. New thinking on taxes, and crucially, this week we will begin the debate on how we mobilize private investment around SDGs at a completely new scale too. So I think for some time, we have all felt that we have been in an era of change. I think what is now crystal clear is that we're in a change of era. And that means we're going to have to think about new ways to work together, because I think if we've learned one thing this year, it's that pandemics like poverty don't stop at passport control. So Kristalina, David, we're so grateful for you sparing us some time. And I'm going to now hand both the stage and the screen to you, Kristalina, for some opening remarks before, David, I come to you. Kristalina, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. And thank you for all you have done to prepare the program for the parliamentarians for this week. We so much regret that you are not here with us in Washington. We value, both David and I value very much an engagement with the elected representatives of the people we serve. And I am sure that this hour would be great exchange and enlightenment for how we think about what we do next. I will concentrate my opening remarks on 3 points. Where is the world economy headed? What is the IMF doing in this context? And what are the key policy recommendations we will be amplifying during the meetings? So where is the world economy today? We are going to release our projections tomorrow. And what they would say is that it is slightly better now than we projected it to be a couple of months ago. We expected minus 4.9%. Tomorrow we would say it's a little less than that for 2020. And when we look at the world, some advanced economies plus China are indeed doing somewhat better. But we have many emerging market economies and especially poor countries that are in precarious situation. Why are we doing somewhat better? First and foremost, because of the massive fiscal and monetary support that was provided in a synchronized manner, and it put a floor under the world economy. And second, because we all have learned how to reopen while the pandemic is still with us, and while there are spikes and we have to contain them, there is no expectation of a return to the full lockdown that we had at the start of the pandemic, where we really didn't know what are the measures, the micro measures like wearing masks and social distancing, that can be protecting the economy better. And if you look at China, the country that has gone furthest in recovery, they're going to finish the year with a positive growth rate because of the ability to stimulate the economy and also apply all these measures. But advanced economies, what do? Whatever it takes. What poor countries do, only what is possible. And what is possible for them is much less than what is possible for the rest. Just as a comparison, average fiscal stimulus in advanced economies, 8% of GDP or more. Average fiscal stimulus in low-income countries, up to 2%. Now, this is where we come in. The Bretton Woods institutions that were so wisely created to deal with another big tragedy, the destruction of the Second World War. Both the World Bank and we at the fund, we have leaned forward with all the capacity we have. At the fund, we have provided support to 81 countries, some $100 billion, of which massively the orientation was towards low-income countries. 47 low-income countries benefited from that. We also have provided debt relief to our poorest members. 29 countries do not have to serve their dues to the fund for another 6 months. We just extended this debt relief, giving them precious resources for their nurses, for their doctors, for their vulnerable people. But even with this, we know that poverty is on the rise. And it is tragic after decades of that downward trend to see poverty jumping up, to see hunger jumping up, which takes me to my third point, which is what needs to be done. Okay, what next in this phase of the crisis? We have formulated our policy recommendations in a fairly clear manner. First and foremost, still prioritize health. Until we get a durable exit from the health crisis everywhere, we ought to take every measure possible to protect the health of people, to protect the lives of people. Because when we do that, we also protect their livelihoods. Second, very important, do not avoid withdrawing support prematurely. It is a rare case when you would hear the head of the IMF to say, spend more, because we recognize that we are what I quote in my pre-annual meeting speech, the long ascent. It is going to be really tough road to recovery, uneven, uncertain. And to go through that, we have to sustain support for workers and for firms. And of course, over time, turn it more towards a more targeted support. Why? Because if we withdraw it, we cut these lifelines, bankruptcies and unemployment can be truly devastating for our future. Third, and the third is very important, we have to be agile and flexible in providing the support with an eye on what we want the world to look like on the other side of this crisis. And what we want is not to replicate the economies of pre-pandemic days. What did we have there? Low productivity, low growth, high inequality, and a looming climate crisis. We have to direct resources forward to green, smart, equitable. And that is where the fund and the bank comes with policy advice how to do it. Last but not least, deal with debt. Many countries stepped into this crisis with high debt levels. And what we're seeing now is where are debt levels headed? Up, up. In advanced economies, they would reach 125% of GDP. In low-income countries, 50% of GDP. But let's remember, they have much less borrowing capacity. So dealing early with that, we have encouraged debt suspension. Now what we want to see is zero on where that is not sustainable, and where it is not sustainable, take action on restructuring early. Reform the debt, international debt architecture to prevent a debt crisis from happening. There is a risk of that. We have to be fair. And then something that David champions massively, debt transparency. We cannot deal with the debt mountain if we have no idea what exactly it is composed of. So we can actually get to write on digitalization, on the knowledge economy, but we can only do it if everybody has access to it. So we will be, what I want to see is coming out of this crisis, everybody having access to the internet, everybody having access to education and skills for the 21st century. Pericles, who is the father of democracy, as we know, said, what you leave behind is not what is engraved on stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. The best memorial we can build for the woman who never hugged her baby is a better world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristalina. Thank you so much for that. And I think a lot of us found the analogy of the long ascent very useful, and we'll come back to some questions about how we make sure there are provisions to get everyone to the summit and not just some. David, let me hand the screen and the stage to you now for your opening remarks, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Liam and Kristalina. Honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm pleased to be with you and regret that it's virtually. And I want to thank the Parliamentary Network and the IMF for jointly organizing this important event. I listened to Kristalina and subscribe to her excellent opening remarks. And I'd just like to underscore the warmth of our working relationship. Having the IMF and World Bank working closely together during this time of crisis provides an axis of support for the world, and especially, I think, for the poor. And so I won't repeat, she spoke so eloquently, but I do want to thank all parliamentarians for the work that you do, and also for the importance of the people that you represent. We work for them, and it's a big challenge, but it's also a good relationship. The data is daunting. Poverty and inequality are rising rapidly. We have median incomes falling in many parts of the world, and growth is deeply negative, and it's affecting people. It's affecting the disadvantaged the most. It's affecting children. 80 million children have missed vaccinations, and we think 1 billion children in the developing world alone are missing school, which is a big setback for their futures. And it's infant mortality, one of the key progress notes over the last many decades, is rising rapidly because of the loss of income and the loss of nutrition that's occurring in many of the poorest countries. The countries around the world are taking action on this. And Kristalina addressed that some, and it's been very helpful to have both the fiscal stimulus and also central banks buying assets. That's helped support markets and been a response to this crisis. But it's much more, I think, needs to be done on the inequality problem. Our data shows that poverty, extreme poverty, is likely to go up 150 million people in 2021, which is just staggering. It's a disaster for the world. What we've done is put in new programs. So we have 111 programs that started in April and May that are for emergency health supplies that are working to help countries with that aspect of the COVID crisis. And then over time, we're having a big surge in our grant and low interest rate lending programs around the world that will help countries prepare for the recovery. I'll give you some examples. In Malawi, we're providing funding for the detection and surveillance of health systems and to strengthen them so that they can be more prepared for the shock that's upon them now. In Morocco, we're assisting in the procurement of drugs and equipment and medical supplies to help manage the cases that are scaling up rapidly. And in Nigeria, the IFC, that's our private sector arm, is helping small and medium-sized enterprises in several sectors through working capital and trade finance, which is so important to allow businesses to keep running in this downturn. We've announced a commitment to provide funding for vaccines as those become available, so countries would have the financing to buy vaccines. IFC has launched a $4 billion platform to support the manufacturing of vaccines that would become available to developing countries. So these are important. It's going to be critical to move beyond the COVID crisis and begin to, again, grow and start responding to the poverty. But the reality of the current situation is that it's on the rise. I'll just say a couple words on debt. Kristalina addressed it carefully. I want to underscore the importance and the difficulty of transparency. There's for many years been a move away from transparency in terms of the debt contracts that governments enter into. Even for advanced economies, it's important to have full transparency of government contracts, including, and this is one area that I think work needs to be done on, the public pension funds and the outlay projections. If you say to your governments today, how much will the public pension fund be costing us 10 years from now, that data is not available. They look at the unfunded liabilities, but they don't look at the actual outlays that will be required from the taxpayer in order to support these pension funds. So it's part of the whole transparency. The importance of transparency is it helps governments adjust and begin to make the most useful investments that they can. I wanted to say a word on the debt suspension initiative. We've pushed hard for it to be broadened to more creditors. There are still some of the largest creditors in the world that aren't fully participating in the initiative. And that means that money is being drained from the poorest countries to go to some of the richest creditors. So we're working hard on that. And we would also like to see it extended through 2021. I think there'll be some extension of the initiative. And one thing that Kristalina and I have offered to the G20 and is that we would have a joint action task force to look at ways to actually reduce the debt of the poorest countries. This, I think, is a high priority in gaining recovery. So as we think about all these challenges, the purpose is to have better health, better education, and more jobs for people in the poorest countries. And we have work that's being done every day by our offices around the world in order to support those efforts. We're actively monitoring labor markets, for example, during the pandemic, in order to have a real-time assessment of the losses in jobs, but also some of the skills that could be used to rebuild jobs down into the future. I want to highlight one challenge that we are working on with the IMF, and that's in Sudan. We're supporting what the World Bank's trying to do is support the learning and from home for the public schools, and we're also helping train public school teachers to harness distance learning. In the meantime, we have joint efforts to try to increase the funding for Sudan, though I have to say it's been problematic. It's been a slow effort. And so we look for and hope for further progress in Sudan, but also in other fragile countries around the world, such as Somalia and Burkina Faso, and many of the others that are facing such hard situations. In Haiti, we're working to try to ensure continuity of school feeding programs through home deliveries of dry rations. So as the kids don't go to school, is there a way to get the food to go to the homes to help the children? And we're also working, and Crystalline and I both spoke this morning to the joint ministerial on climate action. So the World Bank remains the world's largest multilateral funder of climate action programs. I'm pleased to say that in my first year as president, which ended in June, we had the biggest year for the World Bank ever in terms of climate financing, and we are stepping up that effort going into the future, which is so important for the world and for the development of a resilient set of economies. You are very important partners for us, helping us define our development priorities. Also, how do we implement the evidence-based policies that we work so hard to develop? And also, how do we translate our mandate into having big impact on country outcomes? That's one of my highest priorities, to make sure that the countries that we work in get as good an outcome as we can possibly put together, working with the whole community and with the government of the country. But in the end, what we want to do is help the people of the country do better next year than they did this year, and their children do better and better and better. So I look forward to our conversation today, and I very much look forward to our partnership, what we can do to achieve a resilient recovery for the world's poorest. Thank you. Thank you, Liam.
David, that's absolutely brilliant. And I mean, thank you just for setting out not just the full panoply of the bank's responses, but for being really candid about the scale of the response that we now confront. So we're going to try and open this up now. We've done a couple of these over the last year, so we've got a little bit of practice in. So I'm going to ask 2 or 3 of my colleagues just to stand by and ask their questions. Nida Tazi, Fadi Alami, and Othma Karas, if you can just stand by, please. But perhaps I could get the ball rolling with this question to you both, which is, we have the G20 coming up in November. I was in Downing Street 10 years ago when my boss at the time, Gordon Brown, brought the London G20 together. We had a pretty significant response back then. Could you give us a flavour today of your judgment about the speed and the scale of the response that is now needed? And crucially, how do we begin to mobilise resources significant enough for the moment? Over the last week, both of you have made really important interventions. Kristalina, you talked about the need for a big bazooka in your interview with the Financial Times on Friday. And David, mentioned that you made it in particular about the joint action plan on debt restructuring, both amongst very significant initiatives, very important policy and intellectual leadership. But give us a sense of speed, scale, and what we're going to need to do to mobilize the resources necessary to meet the moment. Kristalina, let me invite you to answer first, and then I'll come to David, and then I'll come to my other colleagues.
Thank you for the question. Let's start from speed. In the first phase of this crisis, the response was phenomenal. If you compare this to previous times, the mobilization that has taken place this time around in terms of fiscal measures and in terms of monetary policy has been both on the right scale and with the right speed. The question for us is, what next? What we are looking towards is a dramatic challenge because we don't know today how long the health crisis is going to last, but we do know it is not going to be over in the immediate future. And even when we have vaccines and treatment, how quickly they can exercise the effect that is necessary is still to be seen. So in that uncertainty, it is paramount to provide sufficient support and to do so everywhere. And that is why in my speech, I use this visual of we are climbing a mountain and we are connected by a single rope. We are as good as the weakest of our climbers. So how we help the weakest climbers to get to the top of the mountain, that has to be our preoccupation, because otherwise it would drag the world economy down. What does it mean in terms of scale? Well, it would be necessary to continue with fairly massive fiscal support measures, and we will have to generate financial support for the countries that don't have access to markets, and do so not only with loans on concessional terms, but also with grants. And I would wholeheartedly support anything that can be done for more grants to be provided to low-income countries. In terms of what can we do for that, at the IMF, we are working with the membership to move SDRs from countries that have it but don't need it to countries that very badly need it. And I must say, I am encouraged. We have been successful. We set the target in April to achieve until today. We have exceeded this target, and of course, we will continue to do that mobilization. Would that be enough? You talked about the bazooka. Our shareholders were smart, and Gordon Brown is to get a lot of credit for that smart. After the global financial crisis, they quadrupled the financial capacity of the fund to lend. Before the crisis, it was 250 billion. Now it is 1 trillion. We have deployed 280 billion out of the trillion. And I can tell you, we have a lot, we still have a big bazooka, and we will be monitoring where we are headed. So we would know, is it necessary to do more? But there is one big difference today vis-a-vis 10 years ago, that we can work collectively. If you wish, we now have collectively a much bigger bazooka than then. We have the regional financial arrangements, like the European Stability Mechanism. These arrangements together come close to $1 trillion as well. And we have central banks with very massive accumulated reserves of $11 trillion. So we as a world, we are better equipped. We would be successful though only if we are coordinated. So we use this firing capacity in a coordinated fashion, and if we are attentive to the needs of our poorest members. And there I can only urge us not to lose sight of what matters. And what matters is that we all get up to the top of the mountain, all of us.
Excellent. I think what people really welcome is both the candor and the creativity that you've brought to this debate. Let me, David, you've disappeared slightly from my screen, but I'm hoping
Sorry about that. My camera went off. Am I back?
You're not back. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. There you go.
So Liam, adding on to what Kristalina said, so I want to use the analogy, if I may. So we're climbing up the mountain. What we have tried to do is see a line of sight so that we can see beyond the, I'm going to
Don't worry,
try to.
we can still hear you.
I'm going to try. I'll keep talking, and I'm going to try to switch to another camera here. So one second, and it may just go. Let's try that. Okay, so we need the line of sight to go over to the future, a resilient recovery. And one of the big obstacles in that line of sight, meaning blocking our view to the future for the poorest countries, is the amount of debt. There aren't the tools right now to reduce that debt, and the interest rate keeps compounding on the debt. And so it ends up being a burden that the people of the country can't really see see to the other side of the crisis. So one of the things I think need to work on is the tools themselves. Our report this morning, just out today, is new data showing that the debt of the poorest countries is $744 billion. A big percentage, over 60%, is to China. This is of the official bilateral debt. And so that creates this giant challenge for the world in terms of making it a deeper debt moratorium. And the reason that's important to the countries is it's one of the biggest sources, potential sources of savings or of cash flow that they can achieve. Right now, what they've been doing is continuing to pay on the debt. So I just want to connect that very directly to the inequality problem of the world, that in order to break out of that, there has to be a change, and the governments have to find a way, the governments of the poorest countries have to find ways that they don't have to make those huge payments that they're still making on a lot of the debt right now. I wanted to raise two other points. One is the world that we're going into is definitely going to be, so you can wait for it, definitely going to be different than the pre-COVID world. And so one of the hardest things for the development world is, how do you help countries make that change? You have to have a lot of change. You have to have the assets that exist, already existing assets, go into new purposes. And that requires maybe a bankruptcy process or some kind of debt resolution where the assets can move to the new purpose. Job skills have to be repurposed and reskilled into the new economy. So someone who had expected a lifetime career in tourism may need to look at some broader activities that they can be involved in. And very importantly is the countries have to find ways to bring in private sector investment into new areas, ones that they may not have known was going to be attractive in their own country, but in the post-COVID world, it's going to be a new kind of investment. So in all those areas, I think we need innovation. The countries themselves need to be innovative, but we as international institutions also need to be willing to change rather dramatically. So that's one of the biggest things I do within the World Bank, is encourage people to break out of inertia. So in almost every business line that we have within the World Bank, I'm asking people, think about ways you can do it differently from the way that you did it in the past, whether it's writing a report, whether it's designing a program, whether it's making a relationship with a country. All of those have to be done differently. And the final point I wanted to mention is the importance of clear data and transparency. I know I harped on that before, but it just becomes a very real obstacle because we're swimming upstream. Many of the players within the international stage want to keep data and information secret to themselves. That gives power, that perpetuates governments. And so one of the things that we need to do is have sunlight shine on the various activities of the governments so that they can work and function so much better for their people. Thanks.
I think it's a really good challenge, because when we ask parliamentarians around the world for their view about the frameworks that we operate in, actually people want to hold on to the SDGs and to Paris, despite the fact the world has changed very fundamentally. So it's absolutely going to require some different and more innovative thinking.
Can I break in on
Yeah.
that? Crystalline and I talked on an important conference this morning on climate change, and I made the point that one of the key things to do is to recognize that high carbon electricity production is still basically the norm in much of the world, and so breaking out of that and finding ways to have lower carbon production of energy is going to be one of the key challenges. But the inertia is just incredible. New carbon coal-fired plants are still being designed and still being started as projects, and in mega size. So we talk about the renewable energy, but the percentage of the world that's getting its electricity from renewable sources, I think we're working on getting the data, the transparency, but I think it's actually going down because you've got all these new high carbon electricity sources still coming on stream and still even being started.
Yeah, it's a good challenge to our members and our network, I think. Right, I'm going to go to Neela now in Morocco, and then to Fadi in Lebanon, and Othma, I think, in Brussels. Neela, over to you.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, hello, Liam. Hello, Mr. Malpas and Mrs. Georgieva. Good morning for those who are in the United States, and hello for those who are in the South. So thank you for this brilliant introduction. I will ask a very global question, even though I've heard what you just said, that is very, very important to keep in mind, but we will need time to adapt to these reforms and to this big shock of COVID. We definitely know there will be a world before and a world after COVID-19. But still, in the meantime, the rich countries have implemented considerable means to support their respective economies, while the countries of the South are suffering from the same consequences of COVID crisis without having the necessary means to face it and recover their economies. The threat is really strong in these countries, and some of which are considered as to be spaces of stability, like the country I belong to. I'm Moroccan, I'm a member of Moroccan Parliament. These countries that are spaces of stability have not found an international response to match the situation, nor to match what is needed as it is in northern countries. And my question is, how do international institutions intend to provide responses to emerging countries now in this momentum that is absolutely terrible? What emergency plan, what help for access to the vaccine, access to healthcare, on which depends the return to normal economic activity?
Nicola, that's brilliant. And I know from having looked at the questions that have come in from around the network, you're asking for many people. Crystalina, David, I'm going to take three, if that's okay, just to maximize the number we get in. So can I go to Lebanon now? Fadi, can I bring you in at this point, please?
Yes.
Hey.
I hope you can hear me.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Just good morning, good afternoon, honorable speakers and Mr. Moderator. I'm probably going to have a question that's a bit more focused on the resilience of the healthcare system, since I've heard from the opening statements that the concern would be giving priority to the healthcare system. So at least we'll have people healthy enough to be able to carry on their duties and build their economies. Lebanon has a very specific, unique case. We're almost in a failed state, unfortunately. Lebanon started negotiations with the IMF due to so many governance issues in the country, and then the recent port explosion, Beirut port explosion, added more burden to the problems that the government of Lebanon is trying to deal with. And right now we have escalating numbers of COVID-19 cases. We have a serious issue with the public healthcare system not being able to get the support and the external financing that's being needed. And the same applies to the private sector that happens to be providing 80% of the healthcare services in the country. Personally, with the Lebanese Parliament and the Healthcare Committee, we tried to talk to the World Bank and we had some virtual meetings also with the financial arm, the IFC, looking into ways to at least be able to bring some funds to the private sector. And this way we can at least take care of the escalation of the COVID-19. And then we ended up with really going nowhere because the IFC required that we have certain guarantees by the government, and the government has failed and defaulted on paying its obligations to the external world and the financial community. So I'm very much keen to say that I would really hope sincerely that the World Bank and the IMF would focus on that specific aspect. A practically failed state, it's sad to say that, and I'm a member of the parliament now, and I've been in this parliament for 2 years, but at the same time, we have a healthcare system that's almost collapsing, and we need the support and need the help. Thank you.
Thank you for just focusing us on the here and now. Othmar, over to you. And let me thank you again for such a brilliant essay for the book that we launched today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Dear Kristalina, nice to see you again. Dear President David Malpass, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have one also global but very clear question. As you mentioned, the IMF and World Bank have provided financing at unprecedented speed and scale. How do you ensure that this money is spent in line with our common global objectives, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, in Europe, the Green Deal, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the digital transformation? Which criteria, assessment, and control mechanisms do you apply? Since the European Parliament is currently in the legislative process of developing such criteria for the recovery plan Next Generation EU, I think it would be helpful to share expertise in this area and to have the similar criteria, especially since we know that in many cases well-designed green projects can generate more employment and deliver higher returns compared with conventional fiscal stimulus. Thank you very much, and kind regards from the European Parliament in Brussels.
Thank you so much. Kristalina, let me come to you first, and then I'll come to David, and then I should just about have time for another batch of 3.
Thank you, and I will try to keep my answers short. Morocco, it is the country where we hope very much in October next year to see each other in person, because this is where the annual meetings next year are supposed to take place. And to get to that point, it would be paramount to get accelerated access to vaccines and treatment. At the fund, our job on this issue is to make clearly the economic case why accelerating access to vaccines is good for everyone. And already in this meetings, we are demonstrating this case. We are also giving a overview of who is more successful, like countries that start action earlier, that do contact tracing, that do testing earlier. They're more successful to get the economy to revive, to step up. In other words, we are a transmission line of lessons that are being learned, so these lessons can be integrated everywhere fastest. As for financing, we have done the maximum of deploying our lending capacity. We have increased access levels and we have tripled concessional financing. Morocco is one of the countries that do have access to financing from the IMF. But let me make it very clear that these are loans. Even when they're concessional, they're loans. And this is why I made the point that in this crisis for countries in need, it is so very important to step up grants and, as David and I were saying, also to cut debt for when it is unsustainable. With everybody participating, the private sector also being part of the solution. So to finish my answer, We saw COVAX coming in place, the alliance to provide vaccines. More and more countries are joining this alliance. And David is going to talk about what the World Bank is doing in that regard. On Lebanon, I mean, it breaks my heart. I have said that before. A country of entrepreneurial, smart people, dynamic country, and also one that is kind to others in trouble. You have been so generous to Syrians, to Palestinians who need home, to find itself in that precarious situation, deteriorating and then hit by the tragedy in Beirut port. From the fund, we know what needs to be done. We have discussed it with our Lebanese partners when there was government. We know what needs to be done. We just need to have a partner with whom we can do it. And unfortunately, at least for the IMF, we cannot do anything in the absence of that partner. We are just hoping that there would be a anchor in Lebanon, a government that we can work with, because what otherwise we face is that the only resource that the country can rely on is the humanitarian support, which, by the way, has been provided in this very difficult time to Lebanon. But that is not the solution. This is putting a plaster on a wound. It is not treating the wound. And I hope that we would be able to treat the malaise by having a good program to revitalize the Lebanese economy. And as for what we do to make sure that money is spent for the right purpose, in the first round of emergency finance, we concentrated only on two things: to have a financial lifeline to pay doctors and nurses and maintain health services, and to protect the most vulnerable people, the most vulnerable parts of the economy. So that was one thing we asked for. And then we asked for accountability. Show us the receipts. Was the money used for this purpose? Looking forward, now that we step into longer term programs, in other words, we migrate for emergency financing to supporting structural transformation in countries. What we want is to provide that kind of matrix that shows, is the economy moving towards knowledge economy, higher productivity? In other words, are investments done in the right way? Invest in people, education, health, social protection. Invest in digital infrastructure, invest in the ability to lift up productivity of people, and do so again with as much transparency and good governance as possible. We are reshaping our work on surveillance and on programs, so we can be that Sherpa on the way up to the mountains that actually gets into the right direction on the right path.
Good analogy, David. What's your point of view?
I'll add a couple things. I can only add. It's hard to add much to Kristalina. Resources with regard to vaccines. We've put before our board a proposal, and so it's working its way through this week. A proposal to provide $12 billion to countries to purchase vaccines and therapeutics, and also support their own health systems that would provide the vaccines. So a critical part of this is to have a big part of the world have money available for the purchase of vaccines. And so I think that will be a helpful use of resources. Another aspect of this resource constraint that we're working on is we call it the cliff, the IDA cliff. So what we've done is front-loaded the resources of IDA so that people can have a much faster, bigger response here in this year. Over the next 12 months. And so, but what that means is that the resources in the future years will be less. That would be okay if we had in our view that we're going to have a V-shaped recovery. But as Kristalina pointed out, it may be a long-term letdown in global GDP. And so we'll be talking this week at the annual meetings to ask our shareholders what they would like to do with regard to the need for more resources, especially for the poorest countries. With regard to Lebanon, we worked hard on the rapid damage assessment, working with the IMF and the United Nations, and that was very helpful to Lebanon because you could have some actual data on how big the problem was caused by the explosion and the aftermath. But as Kristalina pointed out, it's hard to work without a strong partner. So we work closely with and have been very supportive of the efforts of France and of the United Nations in trying to work toward resolutions in Lebanon. And I would make one positive note. You know, Lebanon is a country that has done so much in world history and because of its talents and resources or its location within the world. And so I am just hoping, and we're working as hard as we can to try to put together partners in Lebanon that we can work with. And the question with regard to potential to how do we work with countries to get to the right result? I need to really put down a strong marker. I don't think of it as a control mechanism over the countries. What we are trying to do is help countries find themselves the way they want to move forward and the way that will be most productive for the people of the countries. Oftentimes, vested interests are a big constraint that we need to work around and try to get the countries themselves to work around those constraints. As Kristalina said, we're careful in getting the receipts, meaning when money goes out, trying to make sure that it's used for the actual purpose that's intended. But I have to say that one of the hardest things is to get the countries, to the governments of the countries, to come up with programs or to allow us to help them find programs that will be beneficial to the people of the country. Oftentimes, they're beneficial to the vested interests of the country. I want to close on climate change. So several aspects of it illustrate this point. We are trying to work with countries to help them reduce the subsidies that they have. A lot of countries are spending a lot of money on high carbon activities in the agriculture sector and in the electricity generation sector. And it is very hard to get them to reduce that, to stop adding to the high carbon sources within their countries, and to actually begin to close those down and move to lower carbon sources. In China, we've really reoriented our program toward lower carbon, toward global public goods, and toward reduction in marine plastics. So that makes up the vast majority of our program in China now, which then has massive benefits for the rest of the world. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to direct the program.
That's great. Thank you so much. Time is against us. We're into our last sort of 4 minutes, but it's important we get a question from Africa. So Mawusi from Togo, can I come to you now, please? And if you're very quick, I'll just get in Nepal as well. No, Mawusi. Okay, let me try Minendra from Nepal. Are you there? No, otherwise I'm going to go to Ziad in Canada. Right, I think we are, as I feared. Mawusi, I can see you there. Mawusi, if you unmute, we will be able to listen to your question. Great.
Liam, this is myself. This is Ziad from Canada.
Fire away, sir.
Me voici.
This is
Monsieur-
Mausi.
Okay.
Hello.
Quelques questions techniques.
I have a few technical questions.
Okay.
Je remercie, félicite
I would like to thank and congratulate
Monsieur Malpass.
Mrs. Georgieva and Mr. Malpass
Nous voyons que
for their points
l'attaque sera très rude
and the developments
et
they've made.
sous-développés,
The
en
task
développement,
is daunting,
besoin de beaucoup
and we realize that developing countries will require a lot of support from both institutions
concevoir et mettre en œuvre leur politique
in order to design and implement future policies, especially as Kristalina has said, the pandemic will not end overnight. Therefore, I would like to know if the amounts of resources that have been indicated by Kristalina will be used in the medium term, within 2 to 3 years. And as for the beneficiaries, who are the beneficiaries among developing countries? Besides, what can be done quickly? Miss Kristalina, you said spend, spend, spend. The needs are huge in almost all areas in connection with COVID-19, but we tend to think that we have to invest a lot in health, in education, and in social protection.
Perfect.
Are there any indications?
Sorry, can I just cut you off there, just because I think we're into our last couple of minutes, but Kristalina, hopefully that gave you the thrust of what is a really important question there.
Okay, merci.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kristalina.
Thank you.
Well, very quickly, we want the economy to be resilient. What this pandemic taught us is that it is not quite there yet. And so if we want to shift it towards resilience, what does it mean? Well, it means resilience of people. How do people become more resilient? When they're healthy and when they're skilled. And then they have a protection in a moment of a shock. We want the financial system to be resilient. Countries that have built buffers now are in a better place. Everybody has to go in that direction. And many countries are not yet doing enough through taxation, taxing especially the wealthier part of their countries to build these buffers. And we need our planet to be resilient, our ecosystems to be healthy, and to protect ourselves against the climate shock. So you're absolutely right that there has to be priority set. And I think it is so very clear that we have not done quite so well yet, but we know what needs to be done. And now we have to generate the alliance of everybody. And you parliamentarians, you have such a powerful voice because you speak for the people. Force us all, countries, international organizations, local authorities, to all do what we know is necessary, but sometimes fail to quite do. All of us.
Thank you. Perfect. And David, let me give you the final word just to reflect on that last question, and any final comments you want to leave us with before heading into the rest of the week.
I think we have to plan for a long-term slowdown of the world, and then the need for everyone to change and think about where their best purposes can be in terms of the few assets that they have, and for governments in the poorest countries to really redouble their efforts to think about what will benefit the people of the country, and then share that, discuss that, get it moving, be transparent about it, and move forward as quickly as possible. It's just vital for human capital out into the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'm sorry that we didn't have longer to get all the questions answered. We'll try and provide written answers for everything that we can. Please follow the debate this week at the new digital platform that we launched today. But it just leaves me to say, on behalf of all of us here, Kristalina, David, thank you so much for spending some time with us to kickstart what is going to be a really important week. Thank you for the inspiration of your leadership. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And we look forward to staying with you over the course of this week and over the months to come in the run-up to the G20. Thanks very much indeed, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liam.
Bye, David.
Bye,
Bye.
all. Bye, Kristalina.
Bye, Liam.